scientist. I've own my own consulting company right now, but I have several years of experience. I've been in the food industry for over 10 years. I studied at Brigham Young University in Utah and kind of stumbled into food science. I went to school to do something totally different and ended up failing miserably at it. Like, I'm not even afraid to admit that I failed miserably at it. And started looking through the course, like the roster, and trying to find a course that I thought I'd like, and ended up seeing something called food industry management. And I was like, oh, I like food and I like business. I mean, I could maybe do that. And became friends with the advisor and found that it was food science, and it was all about making food, but it wasn't culinary. It was about actually making food that ends up on grocery store shelves. And that just fascinated me and captivated me from the minute that I found out what it was. And little did I know that, probably 5 years before that, I was getting a box of cereal from the grocery store, and I happened to read the back panel of a Honey Bunches of Oats cereal box, and it talked about Vernon Herzog, who basically came up with this idea for Honey Bunches of Oats in his garage with his granddaughter. And he worked for Post Cereal at the time, and they were looking for options and ideas to how to make something. And this guy wasn't even a food scientist, but he mixed and blended up this cereal, and the plant passed it along to the R&D team, and they loved it so much that they helped make it into a cereal. And it's still a very popular cereal today. And it's personally one of my favorites. And I mentally put that on my bucket list of like, wow, someday I would love to just make my own cereal. So I graduated from BYU, and a few years later, I went to work for Lofthouse Cookies after I graduated. And you'll see some pictures in the bottom corner. Those are actual products that I worked on and helped to develop. So right when the Avengers came out, I helped work on these cutouts for these Avenger cookies. We had very specific limitations. We only had, as you can see, the option for 3 colors of dough and only 2 options for sugar. And so we could play within that color combo, and that was actually my specific project, was going through and figuring out how we could utilize what our current process was to make a new product come to life. So I loved that. I worked there for about a year and loved all the cookies. So if you've ever seen the big frosted sugar cookies in the grocery store, I used to help make those. And then, we had these brown cookie, the chocolate, Hershey's triple chocolate cookies. Those are called wire cut cookies. And then these called rotary cut cookies, the Avengers cutouts. So after I went to Lofthouse, I got the dream job that I've always wanted, and I went to work for Post Cereal. And most people probably won't think that that's like their dream job, but Grape Nuts was my favorite cereal growing up, and you'll see these cereal boxes right here. These are products that I actually helped bring to market. They're all line extensions of existing brands, but they were so fun to work on. And I like I said, it was a dream job that I didn't know I had until I got the opportunity to go, and I loved it. And I love the people that I used to work with. Unfortunately, our R&D building that we had in Michigan was closed. They asked us to move to Minneapolis, and that just didn't seem quite right for my family and my husband and I. So we instead chose to go to Ohio and work for the J.M. Smucker Company. I went to work for them as a food scientist, specifically for their Canadian brands. So they own this company called Robin Hood. It is big like Pillsbury in Canada, and I helped bring to market a gluten-free flour blend, as well as some small package baked treats. So we had a cookie, a brownie, and a cake that were much smaller sizes. So that way you didn't have to bake an entire cake if it was just you. Canada is 1/3 the population, 1/3 less the population that it is in America. So there's a lot less people than we have here, but it's a much more spread out geographically. And so I had to change how I learned about selling food and making food for people. Canadians have different tastes. They also tend to be more spread out across the country, as well as more concentrated. So Toronto is a very population dense city, and I spent a lot of time visiting there for work. We had an office there, so I worked in the US, but my entire team and everybody that I worked for was in Canada. I just worked very closely with the Pillsbury team at Smucker, so that we were, working together on projects. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to stop me or ask any questions if you do.
I don't see any currently, so I think you're good for right now.
Awesome. So after I left Smucker, we moved to Colorado, and I took a little bit of time off after having my second child, and then started my own food consulting company. We lived in just the right place, that there wasn't a lot of food industry right where we were, but I did have lots of contacts that needed help, and so I started my own consulting business. So I work on anything now from the back panel labels to developing, a nutrition facts panel or ingredient statement. I can develop a brand new product, bring it to market, or I do problem solving for existing clients or products. So have been experienced, in doing that from the beginning with all of my projects throughout my career. So today we're going to just talk a little bit about what is food science. And we're going to talk a little bit about careers in food science. And if anybody wants to speak up, we can also take a second and chat about the different components that go into food. So carbs, proteins, fats, and kind of talk about why those are important and what functions they play in a finished product. If you guys are interested, raise your hand, send a chat to Rachel, or unmute yourself and let me know. We'll also talk a little bit about education, what it takes to become a food scientist, and then at the end we'll have questions. But like I said, if you have questions until, leading up to that, feel free to stop me anytime. So a couple just fun trivia questions. Did you know during the lifetime of an average person, we consume about 35 tons of food? A lot of food. And a lot of that, people are learning to cook themselves more often, but at the same time, there's still a huge demand for people to have prepared packaged food that lasts longer, that tastes better, that meets certain nutritional aspects that someone would desire. And that's where a food scientist really comes in. We just had pizza tonight, and Americans eat around 100 acres of pizza a day, or about 350 slices per second. So clearly, I think that's probably expanded extensively since everybody's had the stay-at-home order. I know Domino's is very busy, as is Pizza Hut and all the other pizza chains. So I bet that's increased quite a bit. There are more than 7,000 varieties of apples grown in the world. I can only name maybe 10 to 15. And I'm sure that's probably true for most people, but it's amazing to think about the variety that we have on this earth and how amazing it is that we have that amount of variety. And lastly, just for fun, the biggest hamburger ever served weighed over 8,000 pounds. I can't even imagine that. I just think that's such a fun fact, though. So what does a food scientist do? So a food scientist studies the physical, microbiological, and chemical makeup of food. And food science is the discipline where we use biology, physical science, and engineering to study the nature of food, the causes of the deterioration of food, and the principles underlying food processing. So we use that a lot. You know, we use a huge variance of disciplines in order to bring something to market. And I'll show you in just a few minutes just how many people it goes into making a product. So why is food science so cool? I love it because I think it's an applied science for one. You get to see your product on the grocery store shelf. Like, to me, that is like my most proud moment. And I have pictures galore of like, oh my gosh, I found it on the store shelf, and I'll like send it to everybody when it actually makes it there. It's just a fun thing where you really get to feel good that you're helping someone, you're feeding somebody. I think it's really fun. We get to play with our food all the time. You'll see down here in the corner, I went to a color, it was like a 3-day course all about color and different colors, natural colors, artificial colors, how they all interacted, you know, which ones worked best at certain pH levels, or which worked best in certain products. Like, some work better in a fat-based product, some work better in a water-based product. So it's just I think it's like one of the best jobs ever. And I tell everybody all the time how fun of a job it is. I will be on an airplane traveling for work or not work for work with my husband even. And we will just be talking with people and they'll ask what I do. And I'm constantly giving out business cards and saying, like, this is the best job ever. If you have a student that likes to do food and kind of likes science, like, this is the perfect thing. I never knew it existed. If I had, I wouldn't have wasted an entire year on something that I was failing at horribly because I didn't know what else to do. You know, food scientists are never bored. We work in the lab, so we have a benchtop lab that we work in, but we also have a scale-up pilot plant that is halfway between a full plant and the benchtop to test out stuff in larger batches to make sure that it's going to work properly. Because not everything works perfectly. If you say that something is a specific percentage at one batch size, it doesn't always translate to a full size batch. And so you have to make small incremental changes to make sure you get to that point. And we get to travel all over. So this color class was in, oh, now I'm gonna forget. This color class was in St. Louis. I went a few years later to another class in San Francisco where we learned about cooking with, or baking specifically with, ancient grains. And this, you can't see it as well, but all of these breads are made with different grains, and these are all breads that we made as a class. So there were about 15 other scientists, line workers, and supervisors from different companies all over the country that came to this supplier. This supplier put this on with another company that they actually make bread all day, every day, and they make artisan breads. And so we had a really great class. I learned a ton. And sometimes we even get to be on TV. So if you've ever watched Food Factory, I was on Food Factory. We had the opportunity to relaunch Alphabets, which is a really fun kids cereal. It's super low sugar, so it's great for really young kids. And it's got the letters. Well, we launched it with a new size, and Food Factory was really interested to come and interview and kind of see, you know, how it's made. So I was actually the voiceover, and not the voiceover, I was the host, I guess, teaching people about how it was made. And really strange to be on TV, but we had such a blast. That's my, this is the production team, but right behind me is the production packing area for Alphabets. So I got to, if you ever get a chance, go and type up Food Factory. It was only supposed to be in Canada, but I have recently heard from some professors that they saw me on TV a few weeks ago. So it's still floating around in the US too. So we can, does anybody have any objections? Do you want to talk about food fundamentals and kind of about the different proteins, lipids, carbs, or do you want to go more towards what food science jobs you can get and what different food scientist positions there are? Anybody have an opinion?
I think it would be kind of cool to cover both. Oh,
Yeah.
it looks like Eric just unmuted. We'll see what he wants to do.
Yeah, I'd like to lean heavier on the careers and opportunities, but I'd be happy to hear about lipids and fats and all that good stuff too.
Well, we'll keep the food fundamentals. We won't go too deep into it. It's just a few slides. And we can always, if anybody's ever interested in learning more or having more opportunities to learn, I have a whole separate slideshow that we can talk about them more in depth. So we'll talk about the food fundamentals. The basic building blocks of food are 3, and we've got protein, lipids, which are fats and oils, and carbohydrates. So those are kind of your 3 main ones. There's a few other small things, but those make up the bulk of your products. So we'll talk about proteins first. The very first protein was isolated in the 18th century by making gelatin after boiling bones. So if you guys have ever done that, that's when they first really started studying proteins. And proteins are made of different combinations of about 20 amino acids. There's more or less depending on who you talk to. And of those amino acids, there's essential ones, which the human body can't make by itself and has to be supplied by the diet. Then there's the non-essential, where your body can make it on its own and doesn't really need to eat it in order to make it. So there's a whole, we can dive way deeper into that another time, of how important it is to have a complete protein in your diet versus incomplete proteins, where your body is not getting all of those essential amino acids. But the main roles of protein, there are quite a few, and one of the main ones is that it provides texture. Just like gelatin, it helps it set up and be stronger. It also, the flavor of protein comes from chemical reactions with the carbs to make browning. Protein is very important for bread. If you've ever made bread, your bread will work much better with a higher protein, higher gluten protein flour in order to make a strong bread that is going to rise and it's going to look nice and pretty and lofty than if you used an all-purpose flour, which is a lower protein content. So protein content for like an average all-purpose flour is like around 12%. Whereas when you're looking at in the US, Canada is much higher because of their wheat varieties, but the US is around 16% protein content for a bread flour. It's really important that soft versus hard wheat flour. Soft flour is used for cakes, so you get that really nice soft crumb, fine crumb. That's super tasty. When you look at emulsifying and surfactant properties, you've got milk, so homogenized milk. If you bought milk, or well, say you milked your own cow, we have friends that have milk cows, but if you milked your own cow, eventually your milk's going to start to separate, right? When it goes through processing at a dairy, they homogenize it, and it's that protein that helps the homogenization stay together. Same with salad dressings. If you're making an emulsion, like with mayonnaise, if you've ever seen that, or even like ranch dressings and things like that too. And then foaming properties. You have the egg protein from eggs when you whip your egg whites, which is the highest protein content, and taking out the yolks, which doesn't have very much protein, and whip it, you get that big stabilizing, it holds its shape, and you get those nice big air bubbles to help make your meringue. Without that protein, it's really not possible. Though there are vegan meringues out there with aquafaba, which is really cool. It is a chickpea, it's the water from a can of chickpeas. And so if you ever want to try that out, you can whip that and it will look like a meringue if you whip it enough. And you can use it as a vegan alternative. I have a son with food allergies and egg allergies, so we use aquafaba for some things if we can't get around being egg free. So another part of the building block is lipids, fats and oils, and those provide a huge variety of help. So fat really helps with your flavor. It helps communicate flavor. So for example, like Fruity Pebbles, I used to work on that. It communicates the flavor so much better. And it can also change the mouthfeel of the product, so how it feels in your mouth. Good, like ice cream, where it feels really smooth and creamy, whereas if it's got too much fat in it, we call it oil slick, but it just feels like your mouth is covered in fat and it's harder to taste other things. So there's a very fine line between the two, if you can imagine it. Then there is the bowl life. This is like specifically for cereals. It helps protect your food or your cereal from getting soggy in the milk as fast. So, you know, if you look at like Rice Krispies will get soggy very quickly because they do have a small coating on them, but not very much. Whereas if you look at something that's got more of a glassy texture, like a Frosted Flake, they stay in the bowl without getting soggy much faster. And that oil coating is a really big help to just help make sure that if you have fruits, like a wetter product and a drier product combined, those can make a big difference. Having a fat barrier between them so that you don't have moisture migrating from one to the other. You want to keep your fruit soft and you want to keep your flakes crispy. If you don't have that fat barrier, you have your fruit becomes very hard and your flakes become very soft, which that's the opposite texture that you want. So lipids and fats, there's another facet, which is the hydrogenated fats and oils. So that's when you add hydrogen to the double bonds of an unsaturated fat. And those make a big difference because it can be solid at room temperature, like Crisco, which means that it has a higher melt point. It means that you can cook it to higher levels without getting close to burning it or having off flavors from that. It also has an increased stability and longer shelf life. It helps prevent oxidation. And it also can change the mouthfeel and textural perception in your mouth. So you will see that there are lots of hydrogenated fats in processed foods, and a lot of it comes around processing and how it tastes in your mouth and obviously the shelf life. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates comes from carbo, which means, which is carbon, and water, which is hydrate. So it is because your carbohydrates are made up of carbon and water. The most abundant carbohydrate in the world is cellulose, which comes from plant and trees. We do use things like cellulose gum and cellulose to help bind up products. It's very useful. Carbohydrate is used mostly by humans is starch, and the grains are predominantly made of starch. So corn is about 70% starch, oats are about 68%, rice is 80%, and wheat is about 75%. So if you want to think in the terms of amount of carbs that you are consuming. You know, you're getting a little bit more if you're eating rice, and it's a higher carbohydrate with lower additional nutrients. Whereas if you're eating whole wheat, you're definitely getting a little bit more nutrition for your bang for your buck. And carbohydrates provide a lot of help. They provide sweetness, right? Sugar is a carbohydrate. So the low molecular weight, such as sucrose, sugar, fructose, and glucose really help with sweetness. And you take those away and they are hard to mimic and hard to replace. There are lots of different sweetness replacers out there, or sweetness enhancers, that are always coming on the market that people are trying out to, you know, lower your caloric intake, but still maintaining that sweetness expectation. Americans have a very sweet palate, and so we're always trying to keep up with that. Carbohydrates also have a lot to do with texture. So your cereal, the crispiness of your cereal, the thickness of your sauces, which it's not always from carbohydrates. Sometimes it is from gelatin or other lipids, or even sometimes if it's cooler sauce, then sometimes it's from a fat. But the gels and jams and jellies, whether it's a gelatin or a pectin, depends. It's also used for moisture control. So the more sugar that you have in a product, it lowers your water activity, which is another section that we didn't talk about today, but water activity determines whether or not microbial growth, bacterial growth and spoilage will occur in a product. So having that moisture control is critical. Also, browning products, if anybody loves caramel, it's because of carbohydrates and how they function when they're heated. So add heat to the carbohydrates and you can change the texture and flavor immensely. There are sweetness enhancers like maltol, which can provide a different texture to the product without the browning. And then it also flavor control and flavor. So cyclodextrins are really cool. They form a shell around the flavor or color particle and protects it when they're spray dried. So you start with a liquid, you spray it onto a drying bed, and it dries into a small fine particle. The color is then, or flavor is then encapsulated, and it's not released again until it's wet. So it's not released until you pour milk on it or until you put it in your mouth. And then you can taste that additional flavor, which is kind of a fun thing. So we'll get back to the career aspect, but does anyone have questions about the food science aspect? Okay, so where can you work? This is always the question that I had when I started. And the number one place most people go to work is the food companies. So there's a whole host listed on here, but there's clearly hundreds, if not thousands of more, or hundreds of thousands more. You can also go work for ingredient manufacturers and suppliers. Fermenich right here is a flavor supplier that they supply flavor and scents for every industry in the world. They supply it for healthcare, for food, for skincare, for like candles, air fresheners, everything. But then they do flavors for food, and there are many flavor houses out there, but they all do a very good job. Same with McCormick. Like McCormick has spices, but they're also very much focused on supplying to food companies as well. And then there's self-employed consultants, of which I am now. There's lots of different consultant groups out there. Some are singular, or some are multiple people working together. You can go work for the government. So the FDA and the USDA are the two main branches dealing with food, but there's lots of other areas and opportunities. There's also non-government organizations. The two that I work with the most are IFT, which is the Institute of Food Technologists, and the Cereal and Grades Association, which was recently renamed after being called the American Association of Cereal Chemists, which was not as all-encompassing as it ought to be. So they recently changed that to be a little more encompassing, because not everyone's a cereal chemist that's interested in what they do. They do a lot of work in making products better and helping develop testing up ways to evaluate grains, which is really cool. You can go work for a college or a university. I just listed 3 that are nearby. Utah State has a fantastic program, and especially if you're interested in dairy or ice cream or even confectionery, they do a lot of chocolates there now. They have a great food science program there. University of Idaho up in Moscow has a great program, and BYU, obviously, I'm going to always put in something for my alma mater. They have a fantastic program. I personally still am in contact with most of my professors, and I really enjoyed my experience there. And food service is another option that you could work in, that they manufacture products, they supply and distribute products. They are one of the only avenues that right now, well, even a few weeks ago, you couldn't get anything except through some of these food service distributors. So they have a very robust area. Also, testing laboratories like Ecolab, they do a lot of testing for quality assurance if you're interested in that line, which is less product development and more about food safety and more focused on, are we doing the things that we need to be doing to keep a plant clean, to keep our customers healthy, to keep our people healthy and safe. So they're also a really good company to work for. But when I worked at BYU, or was at BYU, I said, that's great. That's awesome that there's so many people, but there's nobody in Idaho. How will I ever have a job in food science in Idaho? There's no way. Well, all of these people and more all have all have locations here in Idaho that hire for R&D. If you're familiar with Reed's Dairy, they are very active in having food scientists work with them, as well as these larger companies. Cliff Bar is in Twin Falls, Glanbia is in Twin Falls, Ingredients here in Idaho Falls, Basic American is in Shelley and Idaho Falls. Amy's Kitchen is in Pocatello, so not far from you guys. InBev, they have brewing facilities all over the country, but they have several facilities here in Idaho Falls. Lighthouse Foods, they have freeze-dry foods, but they also have salad dressings and a whole other line. They're up in Sandpoint. Chobani is in Twin Falls. Golden Valley Natural is in Shelley. They have a great jerky, like they do tons of jerky, private label jerky. Go-Go Squeeze is in Twin Falls as well. So there's a huge world of food out there, and they're coming more and more because we are closer to California without being too expensive. And so there are more companies coming every year. This has grown so much even from when I graduated from BYU. So the types of jobs that are available, there's quite a variety. I am a product development scientist. That's pretty much always been what I've worked on, but I was a sensory scientist when I was in college. We had a sensory lab at BYU where we would test products and have students come in and try them and give us opinions. So I've done that. Could be a process engineer, a microbiologist, basic research, someone that does research for either companies or for academia, government official, marketing, government relations, QA, and food safety. So there's a huge range of food science jobs out there. I'm just going to talk a little bit about each one. Feel free to stop if you've got questions, but for product development scientists, we are responsible for everything from concept to formulation to conceptualization. So it's like having a baby. Like, it literally is, you brainstorm with marketing, marketing comes to you and says, we want this. And it's usually like some crazy pie in the sky. And then you have to go back and think, okay, can I make this? What are, my technical hurdles? What are some things that we can or cannot do? and you work with them from the beginning and create it all the way through. And there's a whole host of people that you work with throughout the process to make sure that it does come to fruition. So if you enjoy working through problems, developing new things, but also working with a wide variety of people, this is like the job for you if you like food. We create line extensions, which are new flavors and new products. So you saw most of the products that I worked on at my last 3 companies were all line extensions. With larger companies, that tends to be more what you work on rather than new products, just because it costs a lot of money to create a brand new brand. And then the other responsibility you have is making changes depending on what's going on. So supply chain interruption. Currently, that's what I've worked on a lot the last few months with all of the coronavirus issue. You know, we've had lots of companies where they just say, well, we've had to shut down a plant, or we've had, you know, we've got issues with trucking, not being able to get from point A to point B, or stuff is not coming from another supplier. So making adjustments based on that, or consumer complaints. If you guys ever find something that you don't like about a food and you want it to be better, call the number on the box and tell them that you want something different, because nothing will make someone's day better or worse, depending on who it is, than to get a feedback from a customer. Or even if a compliment. If you like something and you don't want it to go away, call, because that's another thing that they use to justify keeping something on shelf. So responsibilities, like I said, we start from development and we test it and we test it, and then we scale up to the plant, and then we get to the commercialization where it actually goes to the plant to run it to get to stores. And we manage all of that, everything from start to finish. So for a little quick case study, we're going to talk about a juice. So say you're formulating a juice. The formulated juice product development scientists use a variety of ingredients in order to make that juice. So we are primarily responsible for the formula. But the sensory scientist then takes my formula and they measure, analyze, and interpret the responses of people and their perceptions of the product. So they investigate what the consumer likes and why. They investigate whether consumers can tell a difference in the product if something's changed. So we have multiple ways to do that without biasing the consumer. And we might use it to just say, is it okay? Or we might say, is this better or is this worse? Or can you tell a difference between the changes? They also study the perception, and they help develop testing methodologies to be more consistent with how you test. Because obviously, the more consistency you have, the better your data. So we always strive to have as consistent of work as possible. So they, design the experiment. Every time they do a test, it's an experiment. And then afterwards, they analyze the data and report out the results, so that we can take that data and make a change if we need to, or not if we don't. It's really critical for us. Sometimes different companies have specific scientists that are just sensory, and other times you wear both hats. So I've done it both ways. I've had people that are primarily responsible for sensory, that I just bring them my product, tell them what I'm trying to do, and they design the test. And I've had others where I design the test. So it's pretty interesting. Sensory scientists can conduct tests to determine if someone likes pulp in their juice, if there's too much pulp in their juice. They also use red light to mask visual differences, which is really cool. You can use other colors of light as well, but the red light is usually used to disguise visual if you want people to just taste or smell. It's pretty interesting. Process engineer, so they develop the procedures and the equipment for processing the food. So they do everything start to finish, whether it's a flavor or a food, and they make improvements on the equipment to improve efficiency or the quality of the product. And they are usually lockstep right in tandem with product developers to make sure that they have the right information to develop the right process and the right equipment for the job. So to ensure that the product has a long shelf life, they determine so many things. They are literal engineers. They have an engineering degree typically, and they understand fluid dynamics, heat transfer, and a whole lot more science, physical science, than we necessarily have to as food scientists. Food microbiologists, super important. They help to make sure that we don't have too much bad bacteria, and we have the right amount of good bacteria if we need it. They help to conduct shelf life to make sure that our product is safe for people to eat and make sure that it's not going to be problematic. So we use them a lot. Some people have them in-house. Sometimes you have to send it out for analysis from another microbiologist. So they'll validate the pasteurization process of juice to ensure that E. coli 0157H7, which will make you very, very, very ill, won't survive and won't cause foodborne illness. So pasteurized juice is very important. If you fresh squeeze your own juice, drink it right away. Don't let it sit. Because if it does have any kind of contaminant, it is the perfect growth for things to grow in, and not good things too. Last, I want to talk about chemists. So they do a lot of analytical testing. It's a little bit more different as an analytical chemist. They evaluate products and make sure that the product is performing the way that we want it to perform. A flavor chemist develops flavors from components and compounds. They are the ones that, like that fermented, the flavor house that I talked about, that they would mostly employ, where there's probably less than 200 in the US that are certified. And they develop these compounding flavors, and they go through quite a bit of testing and learning to get to that point. So that's a really cool job as well, if you're ever interested in that. So this one specifically, a chemist is looking at how limonoids affect orange juice. So some of them are bitter, and the presence of them in high concentrations makes it so that people don't like it when it's a bitter juice, right? So they're looking to find ways to help lower that bitterness through blending juices or diluting with the removal of those bitter limonoids. Sorry. So you can kind of see it takes a lot of work between all of these different areas, and that's just typically in the R&D group. That doesn't include marketing or anybody else that puts effort into packaging or putting it onto the trade market, and then getting it from point A to point B, plus anyone who works in any kind of packaging or production facility aspect. So there's quite a bit that goes into bringing just one glass of juice. So if you want to become a food scientist, this is a couple of ways you can do it. An IFT approved college degree program is one of the best ways to do it. You can be eligible for scholarships and participate in competitions. They have a yearly testing, or not testing, an expo that they have every year. And this year it is going to be 100% online, which will be a challenge, I think, in and of itself. But typically they held it in a large city throughout the US. You get a lot of hands-on experience when you go to college and do these types of programs. So there's almost always a research lab. There's always internship opportunities. But the IFT website can give you a lot more information, ift.org. There's a whole list of IFT approved schools. I'm not going to name every one of them for you, but on there You'll see University of Idaho is on there. Brigham Young University is on there. There is a BYU Idaho as well as BYU Provo, both have food science programs. If you're interested in going somewhere further away, Kansas State has a fantastic baking specific program for baking food science and grain science. So if you ever have any interest in doing that, which I wish that I had done, if I'd known, that's probably where I would have gone, because that has been my focus for pretty much most of my career. There's also another list. Oregon State is also nearby. Michigan State, University of Michigan both have food science programs. They're very highly ranked. Ohio State is often one of the highest ranked. So if you want to go to the best of the best, Ohio State is a very good contender, as well as Penn State. They're also a very highly ranked university for food science program. Rutgers and Purdue as well. So great schools on there, and I'm telling you, food science is a fun job. We do all kinds of different things. There's a lot of different options for degrees. So my degree concentration is food industry management. So I actually minored in food science, or not minored in food science. I majored in food science with a minor in business, so that I could be a little more all-encompassing and get a better understanding of, you know, what marketing does and what finance does and our other teams. So that really helps me with the consulting that I'm in now. But there's lots of different opportunities: food chemistry, food micro, a lot of related degrees. Some of the best food scientists I know didn't go to school for food science. They went for biochem, they went for engineering or chemistry. And you can, it's a little more flexible. You don't have to be a food science, but I highly recommend it because I think it's one of the best, like I said. If you want to learn more, ift.org is a great place to start. If you're an educator, ift.org/community/educators has a whole bunch of information, as well as agcareers.com. They have a few career profiles about food science and different ways that you can get on that path. So if you have any other questions for that, I'll pause for a minute while if you want to screenshot it. Anybody have any questions?
So I had a question about, so you mentioned scent, like adding scent to food. How do you keep a scent in your packaged food?
We don't typically add scent alone to food. That fermentant does provide scents for the like the home goods industry and for candles and anything like that, but typically not in food. Okay. Usually if you want to add an additional scent, like as in like opportunity to have a multi-sensorial opportunity for tasting the product, it's usually something different. It's not usually scent. It's usually through taste, texture, and sometimes it's through sound, depending on if you've heard of ASMR, just that sensorial experience.
Cool.
Anybody have any other questions?
Doesn't look like we have any.
All right, well, like I said, I'm Kiery Wilson. I have my own consulting business. So if you ever have a question about food science, or you have a report on food science, or you end up starting your own company and you need some help, screenshot my email and feel free to give me an email anytime. I'm always available. I'm located in Idaho Falls, like I said, so I grew up here and have been all over the country since then, but I'm glad to be back in Idaho and back to home.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our science talks. if anybody has anything that they wanted to add or ask, you can do so now. I also got a message from one of the teachers. If you could send me your names, if you're getting extra credit, in the chat, just to make sure that they get that information, that would be great. And we have one more of these online next week at 5:30, so you can use the same login for next week, which is focused on our Portneuf River Restoration Project. But I'd like to thank Kiery once again. That was super interesting. I think it's super cool. I want to do some food science experiments.
I'll send you a whole list.
Yes. Awesome. Well, if no one has any questions, thanks for coming out, and we'll hopefully see you next week.
Thanks, guys. That was great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Right.
Cool. I think no one's sending me their names, Mark. All right, cool. That was cool. I didn't realize there were so many different avenues to go through.
Oh, yeah. That's why I love talking about it, because I never knew it even existed. And so when I found it, I was like, wait, what? It does what? I guess I always knew somebody made food, but